Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, today I have a list here of important lessons that we've learned on the early season, and I'm going to be talking about these lessons and, how valuable they are and how they affect the way that we play fantasy going forward. So I'm going to start with the first thing here on my list, and that is that we have learned that the quarterback position is now more polarizing than it's ever been with the emergence of the dual threat quarterback, guys like, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Pat Mahomes, guys like this that could come out on a weekly basis and get you 25 plus points at the quarterback position and a ceiling of like 40 points at the quarterback position can provide you a tremendous advantage in your fantasy league. And in past years, the quarterback position hasn't been as important because, most quarterbacks, even the best quarterbacks, would come out and give you, 25 points at the most. Now these quarterbacks, they have freakishly high ceilings because of their rushing upside. And so, in future drafts, I think we need to consider taking quarterbacks earlier because I think that the position is actually more important than it's ever been. Next lesson learned on the early season is that I think Kenneth Walker might be this year's waiver wire stud that wins people their leagues. I mean, we see it every year in fantasy football. There's a player that comes off the waiver wire and ends up being a super dominant player that wins people leagues. Last year we had Eli Mitchell. Past years we've had Alvin Kamara. Even Pat Mahomes came off the waiver wire in his first year. And so, these are players that come out and, end up being a league winner. And every year there's one or two guys that come off the waiver wire and provide this type of upside. And I think that we're starting to see that Kenneth Walker is very likely to be the most valuable waiver wire pickup this year. And he's probably going to win a lot of people their leagues. Next lesson learned on the early season is that I think waiting for a tight end is best going forward in your drafts because, look, unless it's Travis Kelce, the tight end position just doesn't have enough studs to really sustain value with an early pick. If you took somebody like, Darren Waller or George Kittle, in the early rounds, TJ Hawkinson in the middle to early rounds, these guys really aren't providing the upside you want to spend that high of draft capital on. So, I think that going forward, unless we're talking about Travis Kelce, it's probably best to wait on the tight end. And Travis Kelce is getting later in his career. So, how many dominant seasons does he have left ahead of him? So I think that in the future, we're going to want to wait on our tight ends because, we could wait and get guys like David Njoku in the super late rounds or even off the waiver wire. And this guy ends up exploding and being one of the better tight ends in the league. So I think it's better going forward to wait on your tight end pick. And that's a big lesson from the early season. Next on my list is that depth is everything. Now, I've been preaching this all off season. I've been talking about the critical importance of drafting depth because everybody's so excited to fill out their starting lineups and, they want to, get that awesome, score projection for week one and everything like that. And that's great. But we're starting to see is the importance of depth. I mean, look, all these injuries, all the bye weeks coming, the second half of the season, you really start to see who the legit teams are because the legit teams have studs not only in their starting lineup, but on their bench that are ready to come in and replace their starters. Guys like Travis Etienne, George Pickens, guys that are going to have league-winning upside. And, there's teams in a lot of ESPN leagues that are literally without a running back one because they didn't draft enough depth at running back. They did that, that hero running back draft strategy or zero running back draft strategy. And what happens to those teams every year? By the time the bye weeks and the injuries come around, they have absolutely no running back depth whatsoever. And that is the most important position in fantasy. So when you're facing off against teams that have 2-3 legit running backs, you're at a severe disadvantage and you have a very slim chance to make the playoffs. So I preach this every season, but a lesson that we're learning with these bye weeks and injuries is that depth is critically important for your fantasy team. So you need to draft depth in the years going forward. Next on my list is the importance of late round steals. Now, this is probably the most important lesson that I think we've learned this fantasy season because, we've got guys like Ramondre Stevenson, Kenneth Walker, Chris Olave, DeAndre Hopkins, Jacoby Myers, George Pickens, Raheem Mostert. All of these guys, have come out and been awesome, as far as their fantasy football production. And they've come out and, provided you tremendous upside for your fantasy team. And these are all guys that we got in the mid to later rounds. Now, a lot of these guys I had in my sleepers and in my breakout players preseason. Some of them I missed, but, guys like, Chris Olave, Raheem Mostert, Ramondre Stevenson, I was harping on these guys all off season because I knew that they provided tremendous upside. And players and teams that are in ESPN leagues that have these players on their team now have a tremendous advantage in their fantasy league because, they got their studs early and then they kept paying attention through the draft and actually drafted legit players later in the draft instead of tuning out after round 8 like a lot of teams do. I mean, there's so many players that play fantasy football that they only pay attention to the first 5, 6, 7 rounds, and then they kind of tune out of the draft. But, all of these guys are going to be breakout league winning players. We're taking after pick number 90 in the draft. So the importance of late round steals is critically important. It shows every year, especially as the season starts to go along, as we have all these bye weeks and injuries. The importance of late round steals really starts to show. So I just wanted to go over some of these important lessons from the early fantasy season. I think that it's important to take a step back and look at your season as a whole and, how you're going to play fantasy football going forward based on the lessons that you've learned in the season that you're in. So I appreciate you guys tuning into the video. Hope this video helped. Catch you later.